Hello and welcome to our Mussar study group. I am Baya Gage, and we're so glad that you have joined us this evening. We are studying a couple of really great books, and we're not quite halfway through them. And we have really been enjoying our studies. And if you don't get to watch them live, they'll always be uploaded to YouTube and our new Magen Yeshenu YouTube channel, where everything is easy to find, and we even have little playlists, so you can go straight to the playlist of the class you're looking for. It's a wonderful thing. Okay, so the first book we're studying is Battle Plans on How to Defeat the Yetzer Hara, and we're actually starting section 2 in the book. The first section if you noticed, was all the commentary was that the ladies put in there was by the Maharal. This time we're switching to the Ramchal, and you may remember who the Ramchal is. We did a whole book of his a summer or so ago. This is Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. He does some really deep books, and if you don't remember who he is, go back and look on your shelf, and we did a book of his about a year or so ago. So he begins with a profound principle. The foundation and root of all spiritual development is that a person should be clear about what his duty in the world is and to what he should direct his vision during all of his labors. In other words, what is your goal? What is your goal in life? You may have heard it called, what is your mission? Why are you here? And it says here that the only war, and I didn't know this, but the only war Israel ever lost was the Second Lebanese War. Now, why did they lose that war and not the others? It says here that the war was sparked by Hezbollah's kidnapping 2 Israeli soldiers who were patrolling the border. But the Winograd Commission kept asking, what is the goal of the war? Is it to get the soldiers back? Is it to knock out Hezbollah's missiles pointed at Israel? Is it to destroy the Lebanese infrastructure? They didn't have a clearly defined goal, and they ended up losing that war. Similarly, defeating the Yetzer Hara requires that we have a clear and ultimate goal in mind. We need to know what we're about. Ramchal teaches that all our spiritual striving must be rooted in a clear concept of our ultimate goal. There's several different, now, we have to say, well, what is our goal? And there's different teachers here, sages, that give a little bit different wording to it. The first one is one of them defined the goal of life that is to cling to Hashem. Ramchal wrote that the goal is to cling to Hashem by doing mitzvot. The Gra said that the goal is to fix and refine one midot, character traits. The Hasidic masters claim that the goal is to bring about spiritual light into a dark place. And but they're all kind of the same. They're just saying it in a different way. Rav Leib Kellerman said, closeness, well, what they're all saying is that what our main goal is to draw closer to Hashem. Now, Leib Kellerman said closeness in the physical world means measurement. How close are you physically? But in the spiritual world, closeness means similarity. You look like the person you're close to. So to draw close to Hashem means that we need to become more and more like him. And he teaches us how to do that through his mitzvot. Now, one of the best books I ever read, and I still love it, is the Palm Tree of Deborah. If you're really working on being like Hashem, that is one of the best books I can recommend. All of the events of daily life can either have an intrinsic value or an extrinsic value. Now, what do we mean by this? intrinsic value means that the activity or the thing is its own reward, its own value. Its value comes from itself. Extrinsic value means that the activity or the thing has value because it's part of something much bigger, and its purpose comes from its place in that bigger picture. And if the purpose of life is to draw closer to Hashem, then things, normal everyday things, like they give the example here, fixing the plumbing. For me this week, I came home during the windstorm and found roofing shingles in my front yard. So you know what, I get to do this next week. I get to give the insurance company and do that whole thing, get the roof inspected. But even those day-to-day activities, the extrinsic value that they have is how do they fit into the bigger picture? Another way of saying it that they give us is that your life you can live your life in a fragmented way or a unified way. And they talk about the stock market crash of 1929. And you may remember stories about people who were jumping out of buildings because they had lost their fortunes. And they were living their life in a fragmented way because that one fragment of their life was ruined. And even though they may have wife and children and other things, because that one fragment of their life was ruined, to them, their whole life was ruined. In contrast this to the story that we have in the book about Hannah, who was one of the author's babysitters in Israel, and she was born in the 1930s, a similar time, on an island off the coast of Morocco. She grew up very poor and grew up in a time where women didn't have a lot of choices for career or jobs or anything like that. So she became a babysitter, and her husband earned enough money to take care of them. So she spent all of her money that she earned as babysitting on making her home beautiful. She had beautiful clothes, she had a beautiful home. And one day, a bizarre thing happened. Someone rang her doorbell, and it caused a short in the wiring, and it caused everything in her home to burn down. So the author goes to see her and console her, and she says, "You think I'm going to cry over material stuff? The one who gave me this house can give me a better house." What a great attitude. She lived a unified life. She had a larger sense of the significance of her life, and her life was about faith and devotion to Hashem, not the things that beautiful things she bought and surrounded herself with. And in fact, interesting and ironically, later in life, she had a relative die and leave her an inheritance, and she inherited enough money to buy an even better house. So this is the great attitude of a unified life. So let's get back to our daily life, fixing the plumbing. They use as the example. So you expect the plumber to take a couple of hours to fix the leak and for a certain amount of money, but instead he works for hours on end, and he hands you a hefty bill, which is certainly not part of your budget that you had planned. So you kind of have a choice now. If you see your life as fragmented, this little fragment of your life now can take over and cause you to do all kinds of sins. The Yetzer Hara will attack you and say, don't pay him or argue with him or get mad at him. There's so many ways that you could go wrong. Now, if you put so much significance on this one fragment of your life, the Ramchal would advise, step back and see the whole picture. Where does the plumber and his bill fit into your life serving Hashem and doing mitzvot? Maybe this is an opportunity to do a mitzvot of some kind. So it turns out that every mundane activity is really an opportunity to bond with Hashem by fulfilling the mitzvot pertaining to whatever daily activity you're involved in. On the next couple of pages, they give us many, many more examples. I will let you read those on your own so that we can stay on time, but read through that chapter. And it gives us some really good examples of ways that if you focus on the materialistic, fragmented part of your life, then the Yetzer Hara will come in and attack you and cause you to go astray and even farther from Hashem. So battle plan number 24 is, and I love how they write this, because in a previous way back class, we actually came up with this phrase. One person in our class came up with this phrase, and we began to use it a lot, and that is zoom out. The reason that our problems look so big is because we've got our camera lens zoomed in so close on that problem. But if you've ever seen a picture of the universe and they zoom out, they start with maybe the camera on, I'm trying to think of that app, Google Earth. You can start, on your house and see your driveway, and then you zoom out and you can see your town, your state. And if you had a good enough camera, you could eventually begin to see the earth and the universe. And your little problems look very much smaller the more you zoom out. So they give us a couple of steps in this battle plan number 24. Number 1 is to define your ultimate goal in life. And it should be a spiritual one, not a material one. It shouldn't be to have X amount of money or a specific house or the best career or so many titles after your name. Your goal must be something eternal and transcendent. And they encourage you to write down that goal and internalize it. Get it to be a part of who you are. Number 2 is to zoom out until the situation you're confronting is visible only as part of a larger picture that includes the goal that you wrote in number 1. And this will go a long ways towards helping us overcome the Yetzer Hara. So now let's really dig down into this materialism topic. The same principle of having a clearly defined spiritual goal can save us from the trap of materialism. The Ramchal writes, a person is placed in the midst of a raging battle. All the matters of this world are tests for a person. And we certainly know that. Poverty on one hand, wealth on the other, to the extent that he has conquered his Yetzer Hara and his desires and disassociated himself from those things that distance him from ultimate good and has made effort to cling to the ultimate good. To that extent will he attain his true goal and rejoice. So everything we do, we're choosing to either draw closer to Hashem or to pull away from Hashem. Everything, all of our choices will do that. And if the farther away we get from Hashem, or if we pull towards materialism, that pulls us away from being closer to Hashem. And that's the domain of the Yetzer Hara. That's where he will really win. The Ramchal writes, and this can seem a little discouraging or depressing, but he reminds us from Tehillim 90 that our days are 70 and with strength maybe 80 and full of toil. The Ramchal comments on this. A person suffers so much in his life. There's sickness, disappointment, anguish, and it always ends in death. That could be depressing, depending on how you look at it. He said, even if a person lives to a very old age, what does he have waiting for him? Death. The Ramchal is saying that if your goal is a material goal, it's already doomed because, you can't take it with you. And in the end, everything will end with death. All the goods that you have stored up, everything you've worked for, if it was all for materialism, then at the end, it's all gone. It talks about a woman who, in a recent day, her goal was to have a big, beautiful house. So she finally, her and her husband work hard, and they're in their 40s, and they finally get to move into their dream home. Literally on the very first night that they're in their dream home, her husband died of a heart attack. So now she has a choice. Death has taken away her materialistic dream that she had. She could let this sour her to becoming a very bitter person, but she decided to redefine her life in a different direction. She began a spiritual search and eventually found Torah and became fully observant. And she learned, maybe the hard way, that material goals invariably lead to disappointment. It's a snare. Materialism is a snare to the extent that we confuse it with that which is truly good. If we think that the thing, the house, the money, the whatever is what's truly good, then that is our biggest snare. If your definition of ultimate good applies to anything material or physical, it takes you away from Hashem. The Ram Call points out that in terms of materialism, either one can be bad, extreme poverty or extreme wealth. In Proverbs, it says that a rich person may feel so satisfied and independent, he denies God. What do I need with God? While a poor person may feel so deprived that he steals to get what he feels like he needs. And both of these are snares of the Yetzer Hara. So a poor person can be equally materialistic as well as a rich person. The definition of materialism is equating ultimate good with a material thing, material possessions. The Ram Call points out that if humans were created for just this world, for just materialistic things, then why do we have this soul? What is this soul that we have? He illustrates this point with a metaphor. A commoner who is both sophisticated and wealthy marries a princess. He showers her with luxuries, but whatever he gives her is never enough because he can't give her the nobility that her royal self craves. Similarly, no amount of art, shopping at boutiques, or first-class travel to exotic places can satisfy the soul, because the soul is from a spiritual source that cannot be satisfied by material things. The Ram Call continues by asserting that mitzvot, on the other hand, do bring the soul satisfaction. And isn't that why Hashem created or gave us the mitzvot, so that we would know how to satisfy our soul and draw close to him? He goes on to say the person who's doing mitzvot will immediately understand the significance of the mitzvot, and he'll treasure the service which is in his hands to do, because these are the means that bring true completion. Without the mitzvot, nothing real is really achieved. True purpose is not to gather more and more, but it's where the means, the stuff can take you. So if a person who's doing mitzvot to satisfy his soul will be very careful with the mitzvot and see that they are done to perfection. The same way, he says, a person is careful when weighing out pure gold and pearls because they're so precious. A person's perfection for which he was born can be achieved only through the mitzvot. A person should be goal-oriented, he says. His goal is to draw closer to Hashem and break down any partition that separates him from Hashem. But Judaism doesn't hate the material world. We feel like Hashem gave us this world to enjoy. And we're to actually take the physical and elevate it through the spiritual. But we should be absorbed with the spiritual and not the physical. Our relationship to materialism depends on where we start out. Some of us have a lot of resources, some of us don't. And so our relationship with materialism will be somewhat different depending on where we start out. It talks about let's say, for example, you wanted to buy a wonderful, beautiful new dining room set, and you don't have the money for it, and your husband doesn't have the money for it. And if you go ahead and get it, he's going to have to work overtime. He's going to have less time for the family, less time for study, to pay for this wonderful, beautiful dining room set. That's one place. Now, another place is you have plenty of resources and you decide to buy this beautiful dining room set. And when you do, you decide to host great, large Arab Shabbat meals. And that way you can invite more people over and use this material thing to do more mitzvot. Now, I remember, and we've tried to do this when Menashe and I bought our place here. We have a moderate home, but a large dining room, and we have 5 acres. And we said when we bought this place, we want this to be a place where people can come and gather and be together and be together for Erev Shabbats and for Passovers and for all of this. And we tried from the very start to do that as much as we could possibly, and still do. If the Ramkal asserts that if you honestly and consistently use your material resources in order to take you closer to your spiritual goal, then materialism has not sabotaged you. He says in his book, Mesilat Yesharim, chapter 26, if a person endeavors to transcend and distance himself from materialism completely and to achieve devakut, clinging to Hashem moment by moment, then even at the time he's busy with his material pursuits that he has to do, his soul is not going to abandon its consistent state of devakut to Hashem. A person in that state is attached to Hashem all of the time, and his physical nature won't hold him back. His physical acts are indeed holy. His eating, drinking, everything is compared to the Beit Mikdash when they are at the offerings. So even if our goal is clear, then even our everyday mundane activities, and even if we have to work and even if we have to have material things, they can be used to draw us closer to Hashem and do more mitzvot. It gives us a modern day example of Rebbetzin Simcha Horowitz, the daughter-in-law of the Bostoner Rebbe, and she was blessed with abundance. So she used her blessing to bless others. And it gives a number of examples here of how she did that, and I will let you read those on your own. Another example is a family who bought a beautiful apartment directly across from the hotel, the wall in Jerusalem. And so they would let people in the community use their home for Brit Milahs, for bar mitzvahs, and they frequently had classes and other things there at their home. So they were constantly opening their home for mitzvah. But he warns us, this path of using material things for spiritual goals demands that we be really honest, rigorous honesty, because the Yetzer Hara will try to fool you and convince you that whatever this thing is that you're wanting to get is really for a lofty purpose. You could really use that for a lofty purpose. So you have to be really honest with yourself. And in fact, they give us some questions to ask. Why am I buying this? Am I buying this because I want to have some kind of status in the community? Am I buying this because I really want to, this can really help me help someone else? What am I paying for in terms of time and emotional energy? Is it going to cause someone to have to get a second job or, give up study time to get this material thing? And then it says, if you choose to deny yourself that thing that you're wanting, then replace it with spiritual pleasure. Put spiritual pleasure in its place. Otherwise, the Yetzer Hara will still come in and win because you'll feel resentful and you'll feel like you've been deprived of something. He says here, this is a false equation. The less you own, the holier you are. That is a not true statement. So just because you decide that you want to become holy and you give away everything you own, that's not necessarily going to make you holier. Not owning designer clothes does not make you holy. The true equation is this: holiness equals your decision to make getting closer to Hashem your life's goal and aligning your day-to-day choices with that goal. The Ramchak's point is that your ultimate spiritual goal should illuminate your choices. Because you know what your ultimate goal is, your everyday choices are easier, whether you're standing in the shul or whether you're standing in Walmart. So our battle plan number 25 is this: choose spirituality over materialism. And they give us a story, or we can imagine this story. It is the third day of the 6-day war. You are part of the unit charged with capturing Jerusalem's old city. Wow. You enter the old city through the Lion's Gate and start to run south toward Har Habayit and the Kotel. Suddenly, a scuffy soldier with his helmet pulled down low over his eyes grabs your arm and says, "Hey, don't go that way. I know that during the night, all the rich Arabs merchants fled, and their stores full of gold, jewelry, silk, and precious artifacts are there just for our taking." So now you have a choice. Do you choose to go south and fight for the Har Habayit and the Kotel, or do you go north and fight for untold wealth? To the extent that you see yourself as a soldier fighting in a war that has a goal, you will not allow yourself to be detoured in the opposite direction. You will not heed the enticements of the soldier, who is none other than the Yetzer Hara in disguise. You'll want to win the war more than you'll want to bring home any loot. So the battle against materialistic yearnings can be won by this 3-part battle plan. And at number 1, it says it's the same as battle plan number 24. Define your ultimate goal. And your goal should be spiritual, and its relationship, it should involve your soul and its relationship to Hashem. It should be something eternal and transcendent, something that will be worthwhile long after your possessions, everything you have, even your body, is vanquished from this world. So write down that goal and eternalize it. Number 2 is admit that you can't move in 2 opposite directions at the same time. You can't go to the south and the north at the same time. You have to choose which direction you're going to go. You have to choose between emotional commitment to spiritual progress and or emotional commitment to material advancement. And those are probably 2 opposite directions. And number 3 is to choose. Now choose the right direction. All right, that is our chapter 7. I will turn it over to Leah.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much, Miss Batya. And believe it or not, you're probably like, yeah, I know what she's going to say. The actually line up our chapters do. And I think that once I start explaining it, you'll probably see it. So we're also working out of Windows to the Soul. We're in volume 1, which addresses both Genesis and Exodus. And we're in Parashat, I can't say this right, Vayhi, B-A-Y-E. Vayhi, thank you. And, you know, as is my custom, I start reading through our author's, you know, the things that he's pointing out in the parasha, and I look for a common midot, a common Mussar thread, because, you know, this is Mussar class, and I mean, the greatest Mussar book out there is the Torah. So, you know, I'm looking for that common thread. So the first section, he calls it the end of life. And he starts off by talking about how ordinarily in Torah, it'll tell you how many years a person lived. But it usually tells you that after they've died. In our parasha this week, we're told that Jacob lived 147 years, but it tells us this before he dies. And the author is thinking this is strange. Why would the Torah do this with Jacob? So he also points out this whole thing about how, because it tells us, because when Jacob got there with his family, the very first thing Pharaoh says to him after Jacob gives him this amazing blessing is, "How old are you?" And Jacob tells his age. And because he tells his age at, he said he was 130 years old. But now we're being told he lived 147 years. So that says right there, doing the simple math, that he lived in Egypt with Joseph for 17 years. And so the author asks the questions, well, why is it important for us to know that he lived there for 17 years? So he says the only other place in the whole of the Torah where it talks about 17 years is that was how old Joseph was when his brothers sold him. So there's a connection there. 17 years before all the calamity, and then 17 years after the restoration. So he said, let's take a closer look at some of Jacob's remarks in the context of conferring full tribal status on Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay, so this is what this is all having to do with, because we're told how many years he lived before he even blesses them. And it's kind of like, well, how does he know he needs to bless them? Because up to this point, when people died, they just died. There was no getting older and fading away. It was just one day you're alive, the next day you're not. With no clue. And I believe it was in a previous parasha where our author explained that Jacob himself had prayed that Hashem would change that so people would remember that they will eventually die. So he says, okay, so let's take a closer look at some of Jacob's remarks in context to conferring full tribal status on Ephraim and Manasseh. Jacob pronounces in Genesis 48:5, and now your two sons born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to Egypt for you, they shall be mine, Ephraim and Manasseh, shall be like Reuben and Shimon to me. Why does Jacob add the words before I came to Egypt for you? How are they relevant to his decision to elevate them to full tribal status? If we look back in Genesis, we find that the only previous mention of the passage, okay, so I said this about the 17 years old, was when the 17 years before Jacob was sold. After these 17 years, the formation of the embryonic Jewish nation out of 70 souls who had descended to Egypt was accomplished by Jacob's life's work. Now, we just got finished with Miss Batya's class talking about what is our life's work? What is our goal? What is the purpose for us being here? Jacob's life's work was to make the 12 tribes, to make the nation from his family. He had succeeded in his life's work. It was with a good reason that our sages declare in Ta'anis 5b that Jacob did not die. I'm sorry, we know that they buried him. How did he not die? So death normally affects a benefit on the soul by stripping away the distracting potentially diluting aspects of physical existence. Didn't Miss Batya just talk about how materialism can fool us and trick us into not thinking, or Yitzhahara will use that to not think clearly about what we're doing and the choices that we're making? But death is, it says here, death normally effects a benefit on the soul by stripping away all the distracting, potentially diluting aspects of physical existence. So that materialism that Miss Bati was talking about is one of those distractions. Yaakov, however, was beyond death because he had reached his full potential and accomplished his purpose in life. In fact, as Targum Yonatan indicates in 28:12, Yaakov reached such a high level of perfection that his image is imprinted on God's heavenly throne. That is why we are told in the full number of his years, even before he passed away, his life was complete, even before even as he walked among the living, he knew it was time to pass on to a higher form of existence, and therefore he left instructions for his burial even before his final illness. Yaakov had guided the upbringing of all of the 70 souls that formed the nucleus of the Jewish nation, except for Ephraim and Manasseh, who had grown up in Egypt without the benefit of his guidance. However, by conferring the status of tribes on Ephraim and Manasseh, Yaakov linked them directly to himself and thereby completed his life's work. So when I read this section, I was kind of like, I'm not really sure what the midot is, but I was starting to suspect something. So I went on to the next one. I wanted to see if what I was suspecting kind of fit together. So the next section, he titles it Of Swords and Bows. And here he starts talking about how when he is making his arrangements to die, one of the things he does is he informs Joseph that there was land that he had took from the Amorites with my sword and bow. And he said, Targum Onkelos translates this verse as land that I took from the Amorites by my prayers and supplication. And then he goes on to explain, he says the word bakashti with different vowels can be read as bakashasai, my supplications. This homiletic reading is somewhat surprising. Onkelos usually always translates into Aramaic according to the literal meaning of the words for those who did not know Hebrew. The chief exception is when a literal translation might be misleading. For instance, when the Torah tells us in 18:1 that God appeared to Abraham, as an unschooled reader might think that Abraham actually saw God. In order to remove the anthropomorphism, because God doesn't have a body, Onkelos translates the verse as God was revealed through his communication to Abraham. In our case, however, why couldn't Onkelos translate the verse literally as with my sword and my bow? Wasn't it true that Jacob's family had forcibly captured Shechem? Apparently, Onkelos felt that the translation that seemed to imply that the land was gained by force would also be misleading to the unschooled reader. Yaakov knew that unlike other lands that can be acquired by natural means, with swords and bows, Eretz Israel, the promised land, could be acquired and retained by the Jewish people only through specific divine providence. That sounds a whole lot to me like that drawing close to Hashem through your spiritual walk that Ms. Batya was just talking about. The only weapon that could be efficacious for them were prayers and supplications to bring them closer to God. They would never acquire or maintain it in their possession by force of arms without a continual correct relationship with God. The true cause of Yaakov's ownership of the land was his relationship with God. and Onkelos avoided any language that might be construed otherwise. So I thought about that and I thought, wow, this is starting to confirm my suspicion as to the midot that this is starting to sound like to me. So we have only one more small section, and it's the Egyptian mourning. And he goes on to explain about how when it was time to bury Yaakov, how they carried him all the way to Mount Pilat. And then when they buried him, it talks about, how much time Joseph took and all of that kind of stuff. But the thing is the author asks this question, why does the Torah inform us of the reaction of the indigenous population of Canaan? And why is it relevant for us to know what they named the place and that they mentioned Egypt in it? Finally, why is it so important that the mourning occurred specifically on the other side of the Jordan River? He goes on to explain that, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, they did not hide their light under a bushel. They evangelized, they missionized or proselytized, however you want to say that. They tried to tell everyone around them about God, about monotheism, and to help and encourage people to come into covenant with Hashem. It says, when Joseph and his brothers returned to Canaan to bury their father, the local inhabitants saw that the descendants of Abraham had already grown into a large clan, the first stage of the birth of a new nation. They knew that this embryonic nation had already been living in Egypt for 17 years, and that they were returning to Egypt after the funeral. And they were happy about it. Perhaps these people would do their missionizing work in Egypt and leave Canaan alone. They did not know, of course, that the fledgling nation would return en masse 2 centuries later and conquer the land. The local inhabitants expressed their wishful thinking that the great outpouring of grief that they were witnessing at Goren Ha'atad had relevance only to Egypt. They even named the place Egyptian mourning across the Jordan to emphasize and memorialize their sense that this was exclusively an Egyptian phenomenon on the other side of the Jordan. The local Canaanites felt threatened by Abraham's family's claim of manifest destiny to the land, and they wanted no part of the divine mission Abraham had bequeathed to his family. So I thought about all this, and to me, and you might not agree, but to me, the character trait that stood out was Yirah, awe of God. Because of Yaakov's Yirah, his awe of God, his devotion to God, he did exactly everything that Ms. Batya taught us already tonight about aligning his goals with Hashem's goals. They were spiritual goals. They were not materialistic or worldly goals. And he accomplished his goals. And then when it talks about how he achieved what he achieved, it wasn't because of swords and bows. It was because of his closeness with Hashem, that he had that prayer life, that he studied Torah, that he walked with God. And the thing that the last section made me think of is, when you're doing the right thing, other people who aren't doing the right thing aren't necessarily going to appreciate what you're doing because of a lot of reasons. Maybe they don't understand, or maybe it shines a light on what they themselves aren't doing. And sometimes I would think I would go so far as to say, I would use that to say, hey, see, all these other people aren't doing it. Why are you? But what did Jacob's family do? They didn't listen or bow or kowtow to the rest of the world. And these very Canaanites who were like, yoo-hoo, they're gone, we're free, Yeah, well, he said 2 centuries later, they were, I believe the marching orders they were given was they were supposed to completely purge the land of all the people who were there before them. So it's kind of like, okay, well, you had Abraham here for how many years and you had your chance. And this is the response you gave. So God's like, okay, we're done. I wouldn't want to be that person. I want to be the person who, more like Yaakov, took the time to pray and to walk with Hashem and to set those spiritual goals and have that focus that would lead to the point where you're like, by the time that you're done, you're like, I know I've done it. I've done everything that God has set before me to do. I don't know. That's what I have. It was very short this week. So if there's anybody who has questions or comments, or if you think that maybe I'm not seeing something clearly, or you have a different understanding, let's talk about it. Tell me what you think. Anybody can go.
Again, I really was shaking my head at how the two books line up so amazingly. It was just, they just dovetail right together, and not anything we did.
No. No. Oh my goodness.
I think you were very observant in choosing the Midot Yira for this. Yeah. I think that was right on.
Oh. I'm going to tell you what, this one was short this week, but next time it's not short. Oh my goodness. But yeah, I do think that's right, because if you think about it, I mean, what else besides a healthy fear and respect of Hashem could it be that would have a person stop focusing on the physical, concrete things around them and start focusing on the abstract, spiritual things that they can't grab a hold of physically? Mm-hmm. You know, I think only the fear of God is what would do that for a person.
Yeah. And if you think back over Yaakov's life, he had wealth at times, and at times he was starving to death. Yeah. And yet he always kept his goal of being close to Hashem before him, in wealth and in poverty.
You know, to piggyback off of what you just said, have you ever noticed when you read about Yaakov, whether he had wealth or he was starving to death, he did not lose esteem in the sight of God.
Right.
And I don't know what the people around him thought, but he's always presented in Torah as like a king or a prince. Mm-hmm. He's never diminished, right, in Torah. Even the times that he messed up, he wasn't diminished in God's sight.
That's true.
So maybe, keeping that in mind when we're trying to overcome our Yetzer Hara, and we're thinking, oh, but the Joneses, they have this car and I want it too. But, whose esteem do you really want?
Oh, good point.
Yeah. Good point. And it makes me think about, what the Messiah said, how we're supposed to store up treasure that moth dust can, not destroy, rather than treasure that is here today and gone tomorrow.
Right.
So
very good. Anybody else have any comments before we close our recording? Okay. Well, I thank you all for watching, and share it with somebody that you know. Spread it around, and let some other people learn what you're learning. Hope you have a great week. Shabbat's coming tomorrow night. We always look forward to that. It will be okay, Hadass. You will get it all done. Even if you have to go sliding into home at the last second, it'll be okay. And then you can just feel on Friday night, you can just feel, you can feel it fall on you, and it's just a wonderful feeling. And we will see you all hopefully either in person or online on Shabbat, and back here next Thursday night at 7. So good night and have a great week.
Night.